Is history about to be made in the SEC? It has been 17 years since the winner of the Southeast Conference had 2 losses in league play. When it was the LSU Tigers, a 6-2 conference record in the 2007 season. So we are going to go over the SEC and why I think it is a very likely possibility that we're going to see a conference champion from the SEC have 2 losses within league play. First off, we're just going to start off with the projected win totals. Alabama, Georgia, and Texas are all sitting at 9.5. We're going to go through the schedules from each of these teams, sort of go through why it would be a likely possibility, just from the simple enough fact that they have very tough opponents. But we're going to start it off with teams that also have a shot, like the Tennessee Volunteers. That'll be the first team that we're going to talk about here. And when we're looking at their 2025 schedule, they frankly have one of the more favorable ones in this year of college football for the likelihood to get to that championship game. It's just that roster. So they have a home game at Georgia on the schedule. They're at Alabama. They play Oklahoma, and then they're at Florida. That's really the only tricky part of their schedule. Whereas Alabama, for starters, they're at Florida State. They're at Georgia, hosting, Tennessee, at South Carolina, home against LSU, the Iron Bowl, as well as Oklahoma. That is 7 games that you circle on the schedule and is going to be tricky. When we're, again, comparing that to Georgia, tough. At Alabama, that's tough. Oklahoma, at Florida, and then, a later game against Vanderbilt, a team that you would think that they would beat. Now we're going to take a look at and say, okay, so Alabama and Georgia, what is Georgia and their schedule going to look like? So they're sitting at 9.5. Why are they sitting at 9.5? Well, I am going to tell you. They're at Tennessee. The next week, it's 2 weeks off. Then they host Alabama, so that's 2. They're hosting Ole Miss, 3. They are going to host Texas later on in the season. They host Florida, and they're at Auburn. And they also have that rivalry game against Georgia Tech. But when we look at that thing, that is an absolute gauntlet of what they're going to have to go through. Texas, as we know, they have to play Ohio State at Ohio State earlier in the year. We know that's not a conference game, but let's just throw that in there. They play at Ohio State, at Florida, Oklahoma, they're at Georgia, and then they host A&M in that rivalry game. Now let's take a look at some of those up-and-comers, right? Like South Carolina, who was one of the hottest teams in college football last season before they got beat by Illinois in that bowl game, and they barely scraped by Clemson in the last game of the season. So they have a real good September. Toughest game on that slate is going to be at Missouri, but they play at LSU in October. They host Oklahoma, host Alabama, at Ole Miss. They have to go to Kyle Field and be at Texas A&M and host Clemson at the end of the season. Oh my goodness. That is a gauntlet. LSU, they are at Clemson to start the year. Hosting Florida, I'm not even going to put that one in there. I think they should be able to win that game. At Ole Miss, hosting South Carolina, that's tough. Hosting A&M, at Alabama, and then at Oklahoma, again, 6. The least of any of these teams, like we talked about earlier, was Texas with 5, not to mention playing at Ohio State. So factoring in, what would the possibility of Texas winning the SEC? I think that their chances are higher as of any of these teams that we've looked at here so far in getting to that point. It's just they had that game against the Buckeyes that might have their total down a little bit. Let's continue to go through it. I mean, this is fun right now. So let's take just a look at what Ole Miss is going to be up against. And I'm telling you, this thing, I remember looking at this a little bit ago. It is just frankly ridiculous. So they start off the year, all these teams. So they are going to be hosting LSU, at Georgia, at Oklahoma, hosting South Carolina, and then they host Florida, Mississippi State later in the season. So as it goes for Ole Miss, this is one of the more favorable schedules that we've mentioned. Let's take a look at Florida, because this thing is, once again, I mean, that schedule last year was ridiculous. But they're going to be at LSU, at Miami, hosting Texas, at A&M, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, hosting Tennessee, and then Florida State at the end of the year. Like, wow. For them to have to deal with all of that, I mean, that's tough. And then the last team that we'll go through here, let's just talk about Texas A&M. I mean, frankly, they were playing there with Texas for the right to go to the SEC championship game. They're at Notre Dame in September. They're going to be hosting Florida. They're going to be at LSU, hosting South Carolina, and then, of course, at Texas. So that's 5. Again, one of the more favorable type schedules. If you don't have 6 or 7 and you've got 5 of those tougher games, and then the SEC, that's going to be obviously a lot more favorable. But then circling again back to Texas and what they have and why this is one of the more flat seasons that we've seen by a lot of people's standards, I still think that Texas is far and wide the strongest team in this conference. Not just because of the schedule, but because of what their roster is. Like that test, they beat Ohio State to start the season. This is the best team in college football, and they're not going to have a test until October going to Florida and then hosting Oklahoma. Like, I think that they're going to go to an 11-1 record, and you could probably just pick one of their losses. They beat the Buckeyes to start the year. They are off to the races, and they are the college football national champion, like favorites far and wide. But let's say they lose. Like, that's not a huge deal for them if they were to. Looking at that schedule, they just have so many opportunities. Like Oklahoma, Mateer coming in, transferring there, DJ Lagway at Florida. Yeah, so overall, this thing looks like it's Texas here at the top, and then like Bama, Georgia rolled together. I think Tennessee's, it just depends on what their quarterback play looks like. They have one of the more favorable SEC schedules. And then you can group in there possibly LSU, South Carolina, A&M, into that bunch. Like there's going to be about 5 or 6 teams behind Texas sort of grouped together that are going to be jockeying for space in the college football playoff next year. That's what we're going through. And then of course Ole Miss. So about 6 teams that are going to be looking at spots. So you've got to find yourself in that range. I think only 2 losses in the SEC this year gets you into the college football playoff. If you get to that 10-2 mark, it is holy territory. That's going to be punching your ticket just as long as you take care of business in your out-of-conference games. So thank you so much for watching this. It's certainly fascinating because we could go through this compared to the Big Ten, and it's like each of their wins, it like moves up 1, and the fact that it's likely that Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State all wind up with 10-2 or 11-1 records, when we're almost very likely going to see a Georgia and Alabama wind up with 3 losses, and Texas likely wind up with 2 on the year and be competing. The records are going to be a little bit better in the Big Ten, and it's just because like the schedule is going to be a little bit lighter if that middle tier of the Big Ten is not able to hold up to that standard. So thank you so much for watching this. A lot of fun making that. We are getting fired up for the college football season. To make sure to subscribe for more content coming at you in the future, and I will see you next time.